Hello, this is Vision Denial and Clearing Vision MSI 2022. My name is Sam, and for those who don't know, I've watched every playoff game from all 11 participating regions, yes, including that one. And it's the finals. I've got cake. We had quite a game, 5-game series, all very fun. Blue side was dominating. As we take a bite, let's cheers to all the teams that have participated in their playoffs, qualified to MSI, got eliminated, and ultimately to the victors of the series. Some good stuff. So, with that, let's explore the games that played today. Starting with game 1. With the coin flip, Royal Never Give Up got to win it, and as such they got to pick the side for the first game, and they selected blue side. This will be a running theme. T1 here showed disrespect during the draft, thinking, in classic LCK style, would be just enough to take down RNG. But failed to track that this team is good at absorbing early pressure. In fact, it looked like the Royals willingly gave away tempo while having full vision control to bait T1 into their usual risky plays. T1 on their part did very little to appropriately play the vision game and rushed a bunch of neutrals, knowing full well that the draft needs time to siege and set up and zone them out. If T1 wants to play a style that dominates early and still plays around neutrals, then this wasn't the draft for it. Simplify your options and put respect into it, because the Royals read you like a book and played it near flawlessly. In their mid to late game approach, they are so well known for this. So, why take the risk with the kind of draft that you did? Let's take a look at the gold graph for this year. Because honestly, the Royals did everything in their powers to neutralize the early game leads that T1 clearly had control over, and doing so in ways that T1 couldn't actually properly approach, having a minority of the neutrals and what looked like to be any given attempt to try to solidify control lost to them. Not enough. Again, this is some of the worst vision play I've seen out of this team, and it really bit them in the butt, losing virtually all but one neutral objective. And the Royals deserve the win on this. They didn't have tempo control, and they weren't closing it out super efficiently when they had the chance to, but they understood where exactly T1 was struggling in terms of overplaying their hand. And kudos to that, they get the first game. Take a look at game 2. It's game 2, and as they lost, T1 got to choose blue side. This is a continuous trend. I will say this every time. Let's take a bite. This was a much better draft out of T1 regarding just how they like to approach the game. Super early game dominance with some scaling options that play well around the neutral objectives. They also fix their vision play by a lot, and also the way that they tend to be a little over aggressive, Zeus notwithstanding, allowing a lot of the chances to play for picks and solid team fights once they've established their control. The Royals, for their part, chose to play a draft that needs early leads or fumbles as they fall off, and given how passively they ended up playing, only really waiting for T1 to overstep, just kept asking T1 to hold the tempo of the game the entire time, and just praying that nothing bad happens. Not a great choice. We see moments in which this kind of works out, but for the most part, T1 outplayed and outperformed, showing how to use leads for map pressure and how to close out games quickly, efficiently doing so. The Royals here need to play for scaling or actually commit to an early game approach with aggression, as T1 won't let you the chance to passively scale when you don't play to the early game. Take a look at the goal graph here. And immediately from this perspective here, this is not like your typical T1 type of style. They end quickly and they have a very small gold lead comparatively to most of their other games. They don't have the control very strong early, but over time they manage to really pull off proper setups, proper vision, and really navigating neutral objectives in a way that the Royals just kind of slacked off with. And this is something good to see, because only seeing the T1s win games when they have crazy early game leads means that it's easier to punish them by just preventing them from getting it to begin with. But signs like this, really good. Let's take a look at the next game. Game 3. Let's take another bite of this cake. It's so good. And per habit, Royals lose. They pick blue side. And the Royals do the two things here that they were struggling to pull off. Get a hold of an early lead. Close out the game once you have your win condition set. They did it. It was just like right there, and they know how to do it. And I want to see them do this further into the year. The Royals keep showing that they have stronger vision and better neutral play across the board, allowing them ample opportunities to play towards Drakes and Barons in ways that T1 haven't been able to consistently do. T1, for their part, are still playing in ways that are reminiscent of how they beat weaker teams, and it's a little overconfident, and that's why, with thinking that their opponents won't balloon the lead crazily, they get caught out in this particular ego trip. I think that both teams need to focus on how to approach their jungle matchups, especially with the early invades that have dictated a lot of how the games have been going so far, and how they'll be going in the future games themselves. Let's take a look at the goal graph here. And if you have name templates off, most of the time people would think that this was a T1 game, but no. They did the thing that T1 had been controlling the entire time in the tournament, and that's beat them at getting first turret. They get first turret, they get every single neutrals, they continuously balloon the lead, and they make sure to not stall out when closing out the game. Now, granted, part of the context is that T1 keeps aggressively pushing forward, but this is usually under a particular setup where the Royals are proactively sieging in a way that either lets T1 just passively die from things, or they defend and catch maybe some sort of comeback lead. So honestly, this is the kind of game for me that watching this solidifies in my mind what will eventually happen later, but like how they edge out against T1 in terms of like being the best team in the world. Let's take a look at Game 4. Game 4. Oh yes, more cake. Celebration. Very good. And with this, T1 getting the chance to pick the side because they lost the previous game, take blue side. Of course they did. And so I guess Royals will just pick blue side and win the next game? I know that that's not usually how it goes, but the narrative suggests it. But T1 come into this game with the understanding that they have the re-engage tools to answer all neutral objectives and invest more time to set them up and have incredible vision. Like, I don't know how T1 goes from terrible vision to good vision, game after game. Now, good on the Royals to not just roll over when they fall behind, looking for consistent picks and being proactive with the situation. The target selection, though, is a little bit iffy, and T1 maneuver around any attempts so cleanly, it's hard to see how the Royals could approach them. Given that we are at a Silver Scrapes and things aren't as simple as blue side wins every single game, both teams need to understand that the team fight comfort coupled with early game siege has gotten one team to win over the other, even if it's just on the blue side. The Royals need to avoid overcommitting to a fight, while T1 need to work on their vision approach to make sure that it's consistent on the red side also. These changes from one or both of the teams could make or break the whole series and who wins it. Let's take a look at the gold graph here. And this is like one of the closest games that they have. The only difference, though, is that T1 are leveraging their team fight advantages to grab every single neutral they can, losing out only on one approach, literally because they traded the neutrals. And this was really good to see that they could approach a game without having to necessarily balloon a lead at a crazy momentum, and yet still also close out the game very quickly when they got the chance. The period in which they get Baron to ending the game takes no time at all. So good, very solid. The Royals, for the part, again, target selection seems to be a little bit of an issue, and like overcommitting to some fights, but they're usually very good at forcing people to come in, but one behind, that's not the way to go. So let's take a look at the last game of the day. Last game of the day, last game of the series, last game of the tournament. Let's take another bite of this cake. More celebration. And with it, RNG here take blue side. And a spoiler alert, they win. It seems like blue side every time wins. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Granted, this was one of the most evenly matched best of fives I have watched in a long time. For this game, both teams have had solid vision and good approach to the early game in very similar ways. But the Royals were just that much faster to the neutrals in the setup and that much better in terms of vision approach and how to engage these particular neutrals. It's worth to look at this and see both teams only win on blue side. It makes the coin flip at the start, and the fact that the Royals won really iffy. Like, there's a world in which if T1 won the coin flip and they got blue side first, that they win the whole thing. But there is something to be said regarding how neither team had strong responses on the red side regarding their vision approach or drafting choices. It's a clear weakness that both of the teams had. One that both of the teams took clear advantage of. The only thing to me that doesn't make it feel like whoever got the side selection first was going to win, which, again, could have likely been the case based on the approach that they both had, is that the Royals still showed more consistency while ahead early game and adapted better to their mistakes when closing out games, and found better avenues to attack T1's inconsistent and overzealous approach to skirmishes. Regardless of being on blue side or red side, they were better at all of those things, no matter what. Even if they were worse on the red side for it, they were still better than T1 at it from that approach. Now, let's take a look at the goal graph here, right? Because this paints a very stark picture across the series. Similar to the previous game in which how T1 had like full control, even though the gold lead wasn't fully there, but the second that they got Baron, it just shot up and was super efficient. This time the Royals have just every single neutral and have literally T1's entire game plan put just under control. They never let T1 play the kind of game that they want to do in this particular game itself. Faker was neutralized, and it became a very disappointing situation where I was hoping that T1 would play better on the red side and show that they can also bring improvement from the way that their gameplay approach was, but we didn't get there. Now I think that both of these teams, come summer, will have a fire to go to Worlds and perform way better than they did in this series, which is fantastic because they're already performing incredibly well. They'll be also more dominant so that there is no question to who is better, but for now, Royal Never Give Up are the best team in the world. Even if it's just by a smidgen, they're still a better team. Let's take another bite here and then start talking about T1. T1 going into the whole Road to MSI series and like really diving in. We're the only team that, based on literally laning phase and focus on sieging, developed leads regardless of getting kills or not. A thing that almost no other team in the world was doing, which is what solidified to me that they were going to be the favorite at MSI from literally moment one. And then they started to lose some games. They lost a game to G2 and then lost a game to Royal Never Give Up and then lost a game to Evil Geniuses, and people started questioning, is this really is this dynasty back? Should we be questioning things? And then they get to the semifinals and they look way better than the Royals. So what happened really? I think this is a question of this is a team that didn't get much competition outside of Chovy, to put it frank. And when you don't have much competition, this usually plagues a lot of the emerging regions, but it still can affect the legacy regions where if there's no competition, then it's harder to tell how you're going to adapt when your weaknesses are being called out. There's also something to be said about the way that they came into the tournament expecting that they were going to play exactly the way they did in their league, without taking into account that most other teams are going to adapt to your situation and not play like they do in their league anyways, right? All of the big teams still adapted to the situation. The Royals weren't just a fall behind and then come back mid-game team. They slowly but surely adapted to become much better at absorbing and even getting leads come early game. G2 wasn't just some wild card that expected caps to go through all the time. They started being a lot more flexible, and even if they had that crutch, they still show that they were very understanding of how to approach the game for their win conditions and how to neutralize it. Evil Geniuses, for their part, literally continual growth across the board. Every team came in, played different, except for T1 until the very end of Rumble stage, sometimes, and even then, sometimes in the finals. But most of the time, their playstyle remained unchanged, and I think that's just a case of Icarus falling too close to the sun. Do I think that they're going to learn from this and come out better with more hunger and drive to do better when it comes to the playoffs in summer and Worlds? Yes, 100%. There's no doubt in my mind that this team was this close to winning MSI, and we're just this close to changing and adapting to actually have the head against the Royals. The difference between the two is so minute that literally a coin flip decided who won. In my mind, from the way that it's approaching, the Royals to me were still slightly better today. Today they were slightly better. They were more consistent, and us in this channel, we've talked about how the Royals have stayed more consistent across the board, and where T1 have the better highs, the Royals are better at adapting and playing through the things. And so T1, knowing this, need to start being more consistent. Take the dominance that you got from your league and turn it into consistent dominance. And I think come summer, this team will be even scarier than when they were when coming into MSI. Hail the conquering hero. Aladdin references. Let's have another bite of this wonderful cake. Congratulations to Royal Never Give Up. I didn't quite have the faith in you, but you have shown many people wrong and many people right on the situation, but we're always the most consistent team out of everyone. So satisfying. I think that this team going into summer will definitely have a lot more confidence, but the other teams of the LPL will take full advantage of what was found out about the Royals going into it. This was a second seed going into the playoffs and only got number 1 seed afterwards from winning the playoffs themselves. And they were not the cleanest. In fact, coming into MSI, a lot of questions were asked specifically about, like, are they just dunking on the bunch of the teams that are, like, lower seeded? How do they fare against the other teams? The answer is they fared fairly well in the Rumble stage. They were more consistent than most of the other Rumble stage contestants. Come semifinals, Evil Geniuses become way more competitive with them in a manner that most other people didn't expect Evil Geniuses to be competitive, but also didn't expect the Royals to just kind of, like, not capitulate, but play so reactively, which is why it's so nice to see that come into the finals, this team showed not only that they were still consistent in their late game approach, that they were also slightly better in the early game approach, better in vision by a long shot. This team dominated the vision game all the way through. They were also slightly better in the neutral objectives. They edged out on everything across the board. There is no question, even if in a, like, alternate universe, T1 gets the coin flip, Royals still perform better on every front in terms of, like, how to gain their win conditions. And to me, because they're so much better at the vision play, so much better at the neutral objective play, better at answering whenever they're being aggressed on, they had a better approach across the board for all aspects of the game. Even if the high highs of T1 dominate faster, balloon faster, harder to, like, answer, they were still playing better while behind than when T1 was behind and were struggling to get any vision, get any foothold in terms of neutral objectives, to, like, do anything with it. And so to me, this is a definitive, regardless if you think that coin flipping it, T1 would have won if they got the first blue side pick, the Royals were still the better team in the day. 100%. Just from, like, not even eye test, but on stats all the way through. And so I think that even if this is the best team in the world right now, going into the LPL, they may not keep their title of best team in the world. They will definitely bring into an air of how to be much more consistent and better at their early game in a way that will, like, force the LPL teams to think about the way they're approaching it that's not just pure aggression. But what a treat to behold to see this particular Royal lineup with Xiaohu mid lane, Bin top lane, Gala and Ming really going at it, and Wei having such a good series. Really taking control and forcing just T1 to be unable to play around neutral objectives, to play around the jungle control. Just 10 out of 10. And with it, congratulations to Royal Never Give Up on being the winners of MSI. And I'm going to be so happy when we see you in summer and likely in Worlds. Because if you guys just continuously improve from this, even if it's, like, at the same rate, by the time we hit that point, this will be a fantastic team to behold. Final bite of this cake for the final thoughts. So good. Honestly, this is probably one of the best MSIs I've seen since its introduction. The only one that compared to it was in 2016, if I remember correctly, or in 2015, when T1 was defeated by Edward Gaming. That one was fantastic, but just because the finals itself was fantastic. This one, all the way through. The quality of games, even the ones that were stomps, were so good. I am so baffled. Usually this mid-season invitationals are fun, but they're not like the highest quality of games. Not by a long shot. This year, fantastic quality of games. Great flexibility of champion picks. Like our stats man mentioned, it didn't look like there was a specific meta that was like, even if there was like one that was solidified in terms of like which ones are the go-tos that were most consistent. This still had the most amount of champions played in a tournament than I think any of the other Riot sanctioned tournaments, with 99 champions played, and there's significantly less games in this. That said, I think that there was a point where the meta was stagnating, because usually between stages the meta changes, and it didn't do anything between groups and Rumble, and very little between Rumble and semifinals. Come finals, Lissandra was found to be a strong power pick against LeBlanc and Ari. And I'm wondering why it took so long to get to that point. Because it seemed like the team that got Lissandra won. Granted, Lissandra was picked on the blue side. So, like, that tracks. But it could have been just like a case of, oh, based on the playstyles and the picks that we're expecting, this works the best. It's very hard to tell because it kind of stagnated. A lot of flexibility, but still a lot of stagnation. But if we can keep this particular type of flexibility going throughout the rest of the year, oh man, I'll be so excited to see the kind of like flavors that the teams bring going into Worlds. It'll be so good. So much fun. I personally also think that many of the teams didn't get to fully explore how good they were from their own region because of the draw, which is just like the format of MSI is a little rough around the edges. And that's fine. It's not meant to be the most accurate representation of what the best team is. Otherwise, we'd have like a much longer tournament. They don't have the time, and it's not. I don't think it's a budget, but they don't have the time for it. But I do think that going into Worlds, we might have a better evaluation of how all of the emerging regions are going, because even them brought in a level of competition that was a much higher than expected. And I'm kind of hoping that the teams that come through, like, I hope that we get the number 1 seed from the VCS this time. We should. There's no other international competitions that I know of. So we should be getting the top 2 seeds. So not just like the possibility of the Saigon Buffaloes coming back, but the CAM Esports. Holy smokes. And like the other regions will be gaining a lot from how these particular representatives take their information and bring it back to the regions. Now granted, this is not a guarantee, but it tends to work that way. And because of how competitive and how the high quality of these games, I think that every region around the world is going to improve from this. And that's super weird to hear because, sure, the gap may not change, but the quality in which each of these gaps are significantly improves. And that's what I'm excited to see when it comes to the summer playoffs. Hopefully that the summer playoffs keep up this rate. Those are my thoughts, though. What are your thoughts in regards to, like, the whole tournament so far? I want to hear, like, who was your MVP? Who was your favorites? What is your favorite moment? Anything and everything in between. I want to get a conversation going about, like, how you think the teams are going to be taking their experience in MSI and possibly improving their regions. Maybe make another video with the other two in terms of like our thoughts and feelings about the whole tournament itself, and possibly a different one depending on the time. But for now, this is possibly the last video I make until the playoffs and summer start, which could be another month, 2 months, or probably 2 months from now. And so with it, if you like this content and want to keep up for when I start doing the run for Worlds, like for World Watch, where I watch all of the playoffs in summer, yes, including that one, leave a like, subscribe, notification bells, all the rest, to be notified for when that starts. And I appreciate all of the views and all of the people who have commented and left encouraging notes and feedback, and super appreciated. This has been a very fun MSI for me and for everybody else on the channel. Greatly appreciated. And with that, I will see you all next time. Have a good start to the summer. Bye.